So as people are starting to join the program today, the webinar today, I'll just go ahead and do a brief introduction for you all, just to get started, and so that we leave plenty of time for you to see and hear the actual program itself, the webinar itself. So just to welcome you, I'm Marianne Faison. I'm the president and CEO of the Texas Business Group on Health. And it's a great pleasure to say Happy New Year to you all and welcome you to our very first webinar of 2026. I want to tell you briefly about the Texas Business Group on Health. If you go to the next slide, there we go. The TBGH is a statewide organization that has three local coalitions, employer coalitions that are currently the members. That would be the Dallas-Fort Worth Business Group on Health, the Houston Business Coalition on Health, and the San Antonio Business Group on Health. We also have members, individual corporations that are members all across the state. And we're so excited to have so many of them participating in today's webinar. We have almost 100 people registered for today's webinar. It's a three-part series, and I'll let Chris Skizik, who leads the Houston Business Group on Health, get into that. But just briefly, TBGH has two areas of focus. One is the membership services that we offer that would be developing membership across the state, including within our three active coalitions. Hopefully Austin is going to be joining very soon. I see that we have several people from Austin participating in today's webinar, and they're looking at participating as a coalition. We have others from other parts of the state that didn't even know there were cities in other parts of the state, so we're excited to have you join as well. So the membership side does the membership development and the connections between benefits executives from all of the different corporations that are the members, including those in the three main coalitions. We offer educational programs, including continuing education credits. So if you need various credits, SHRM or HRIC or others, we offer those for participating in our webinars and other opportunities you have to come in person. The other part, our arm of the TBGH, is the Texas Employers for Affordable Health Care. That's a policy and a legislative educational organization that's part of this and co-hosting today's webinar, which is on the Claims Data Field Guide series, a three-part series. So one of the things I want to offer before I turn it over to Chris Skizik to do the introductions and talk about the Texas Employers for Affordable Health Care, I want to mention that if you are not outside of the three main regions I mentioned, Dallas-Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Houston, you are welcome to join as a corporation. Any Texas corporation is eligible, employer-sponsored program. And if you're dealing with the benefits for health benefits for any companies outside our region, you are more than welcome to have your company join. It's a corporate membership, not an individual one. And we have a rate of $500 for the entire year for access to all the resources and programs like we're offering today, and other resources from the National Business Coalition on Health, as well as from many other very reputable resource organizations. So with that, we hope that you'll join, but we'll follow up with you. And with that, let me turn it over to Chris Skizik, who leads the Houston Business Group on Health and the Texas Employers for Affordable Health Care.
Good morning to you all. And again, I am Chris Skizik. I am the Executive Director of Texas Employers for Affordable Health Care, a legislative advocacy organization that supports the employer cause for affordable health care. We've been quite successful in the last few legislative sessions getting legislation passed to support the employer's desire to provide high-value benefits, things such as the prohibition of gag clauses between hospitals and health plans, incentivizing tiering and steering to value, funding of the All Payers Claims database. If you are a member of one of the three coalitions, Houston, San Antonio, and Dallas, per an MOU, you are automatically a confidential member of Texas Employers. For others, you could join. There's no cost. Again, it's confidential. Alice Maccabee, our recruitment and member engagement director, will be in touch. But going to the guide here, if we can go to the next slide here. We worked with Chris Deacon, who's one of the leading voices in the country on behalf of employers, advocating for claims data, sound contracts, and more. You can see here. Chris has been a voice for employers for a long time now, having formerly led the state of New Jersey's benefits program, highly successful, has done a lot of great work there. But so as not to take more time from Chris, I'd like to bring up her first slide so we can get going on this. I would ask if you have any questions, please put them into the chat, and we'll make sure that they're answered. This slide, actually, we don't want these. We want Chris's slides right now. There we go. There we go. So with that, Chris, you can go ahead. I know you'll all be thrilled with what Chris has to say. So we'll be monitoring the chat for questions. Thank you.
Thanks for that intro. And yeah, we have a lot of material to cover, so I think we should dive right in. Just a little bit more background to give myself a little bit more credibility here. I did run the state plan. I've been working with employers and unions and nonprofit advocacy groups and employer coalitions for the last 5 years, trying to sort of unlock the data for employers because I know firsthand how valuable it can be. And I think that was really highlighted probably if any of you are familiar in a recent whistleblower lawsuit that I was the primary whistleblower on in New Jersey. The claims data is what eventually led to, and just a small part of the claims data, a whistleblower lawsuit that resulted in $100 million going back to the state from Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield. And that was announced just a few weeks ago. So the power's real, the money's there. We just have to figure out a way to use it. And hopefully we'll get you a step closer to that today. So next slide, please. So first, the agenda. So this field guide was drafted in a way so as to not sort of be philosophical or theoretical or, just informational. It really is intended to be tactical, right? Like giving you scripts, giving you information about how to speak in a certain manner so as to not be bullied by, sort of the other side because they have more in-depth terminology about claims data and HIPAA, et cetera. So this is a true data field guide. Again, because you're in the trenches, right? And it very much feels like, sort of hand-to-hand combat when it comes to unleashing the power of this data. And the reason that it's hand-to-hand combat is because it's so, so valuable. Again, pointing back to my example, $100 million, found very, very easily, maybe not turned over quite as easily, but found easily because of the data. In order to make full use of this guide, I want to spend this time sort of doing some, I won't say basic education. I think we're sort of beyond that, but maybe a 200 level series on some really important sort of ground bases so that when you use the field guide, it will make that much more sense. So by laying this groundwork, I think it will just be that much more valuable to have access to these materials. So I won't read the agenda to you. We can just move on to the next slide and dive right in. And feel free to put questions in the chat as we go through. I don't know how you want to handle that, Chris, but if there's something that I should be stopped for and address during the talk, just please feel free to interrupt me at any time. So most employers, and I do hear a lot of employers that think they have their quote unquote data, usually have some form of aggregated report. It might be a very robust report. It might be intended to look like data, and maybe even you're told that you get most of your data. But at the end of the day, when I say claims data, what I am talking about is sort of the full suite of fields that are going to enable you to do the work you need to do as a fiduciary. Again, what most of us are getting today, and even those that I hear who do represent that they have their data, it's often aggregated. It is most certainly filtered. And obviously it's being pulled from your vendor. So it is very much vendor controlled. Next slide. Okay, so I think not only is there the financial opportunity and the sort of clinical and well-being opportunity from being able to look at our data and understand what's going on in our health plan. There's a lot of inherent value there. But really, when it comes down to it, one of the fundamental reasons why you need this data is because without it, it's like trying to put 1,000-piece puzzle together and you don't know what the picture is, right? Like somebody's just dumped that box of puzzle pieces out on your table and then thrown away the box and said, now you need to put this puzzle together as part of your, legal obligation. Like that would be impossible, quite frankly, to do. So with your data, you're going to be able to fulfill your fiduciary obligations. And most of you have probably either heard me or somebody else talk about these before, but I've put them up on this slide again, because they should be drilled into all of our heads such that we can sort of spout them off and they become second nature to us. Act only in the interest of plan participants and beneficiaries, prudence, pay reasonable and necessary plan expenses, follow your plan documents, avoid prohibited transactions and conflicts of interest, and monitor your service providers. You cannot do those things to the best and fullest of your ability if you don't have the tools at your disposal and the information at your disposal to be able to make those judgment calls. You can certainly do your best, and you can, and I think that's what most employers are trying to do. But at the end of the day, if you want to sort of fulfill that obligation to its core and to the extent that you need to and should be doing for your plan and your members, you have to have this data. So these are some resources and then some citations to the field guide that will help you sort of, again, just drill that into your head so that it's second nature. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the fun stuff. So I have, and I don't know how well everybody can see this from their desk. I did try to condense it as much as possible so that folks would be able to really see what's going on here. But
you're going to have to walk them through it.
Yes. Oh, I will walk you through
just
it.
My old eyes. Okay.
I just wasn't sure if you'd be able to read it, and you might have to zoom in a little bit on your own screens. But the start is sort of the start and the end are the darker blue if you just need help finding your start position here. Now, the right box with more of the sort of flow chart in it, this is sort of the life of the claim and how a claim adjudicates through the system. And sort of the lower left box, that's the financial transaction. Now, a lot of folks think and would assume that the sort of the life of a claim, right? The money follows the claim, or they sort of, coexist together in the sort of out there in the sphere where claims data is exchanged, and with it, the monies that go with that claim. But that is an incorrect assumption. The claim sort of exists on its own, but part of what your obligation is as a fiduciary is to also understand how the money follows that claim. So the life cycle of a claim, both from sort of an adjudication perspective, right? But also the life of a claim from a payment perspective, and understanding how those two work together and sometimes how they are sort of not working together is really key. And not only being conversant about your data, but understanding why it's so important and how it can how that knowledge can protect you from sort of being duped into not fully understanding where your risks are. So if we go to the start, which is sort of on the left-hand side there, that dark blue line, you go through and you have the medical care provided, office visit, procedure, what have you. And then the next box, the provider generates the claim with service codes and diagnoses, et cetera. Now that is then submitted on what you might know is or referred to as an 837 file. And the 837 file is something that's mandated by HIPAA. It's sort of a layout or format, and it's what you have to fill out in order to submit a claim. And the 837 format is consistent across all providers. So while healthcare might have an extremely large amount of data attached to every sort of interaction and transaction, it is standardized, right? So it is structured and it's standardized, which is really beneficial to us. And it's beneficial for us to know that, because while there are some nuances between payers and providers and how they structure their data, for the most part, it is highly standardized, which helps us again. So the provider generates the claim through that 837 file, which then goes to what we call a clearinghouse. Now, if you are unfamiliar with what a clearinghouse is, I would highly suggest that you listen to Stacey Richter's most recent podcast, or one of her most recent podcasts, that really dives deep into what a clearinghouse is and what it does and the importance of it. But in a nutshell, it sort of operates as a hub that both payers and providers submit their data to, and it's then normalized in the clearinghouse so they're able to talk to each other, right? So the provider submits the 837 through the clearinghouse so that clearinghouse can then communicate with the payer, right, or the TPA in order to adjudicate that claim. It essentially takes all that data, puts it into a normalized sort of format and then kicks it out so that the TPA or carrier can then take the next step and adjudicate that claim. So once we go through the clearinghouse, we go through the 837 is then submitted to the carrier for adjudication. That's the pink box on the far right. That's where you have your eligibility check and your contract rates and plan rules all applied and adjudicated for the claim. And then the claim kicks down, and once adjudicated, you see the line that goes down and all the way over back up. The carrier's now going to issue what's called an 835 remittance. And the 835, as opposed to the 837, is the document or the file that communicates to the provider what they're getting paid, why they're getting paid, what they're getting paid. So were there any codes that were denied? Were there any adjustments to the claim? What were the reasons for this being disallowed or this being allowed? That's all going to be communicated on that file. And that file then goes back again to the provider for communication so that when they get the funds, they know who they're getting paid by, why they're getting paid, and on behalf of what claims they are getting paid for. Another transaction that happens from that carrier is on the far right after the adjudication is you have the line that goes up, around, and all the way down to now to the payment release. Now, this is where the carrier is going to communicate either with their own financial institution or with their employer's financial institution on how to pay that claim. So you see there's not a break, but there's the communication on the 835 that relates to the claim. And then there's the actual financial instructions that are now issued to the bank to release that claim to the provider. And if you'll probably get these slides. And so there's some nuance and language in this graph that takes you through exactly how this flow works. But what I hope that what that exercise just did is communicate not just how many touch points a claim has along the line, but at each of these points, right? This isn't just United or Cigna or Aetna who's performing all of these services. There's often repricers in the middle. There's clearinghouses that are either owned by, affiliated with, or subcontracted or vended through these carriers. There's all these different touch points that can lead to both delays in the timing of the payment of a claim, but also each of these vendors that interact with your claim throughout the life of it, they have bills to pay too, right? So this is where the administration of a claim also becomes more and more and more expensive. And the disconnect between what the provider is ultimately getting paid from your bank account or from your carrier's bank account that you fund versus what you are being told was the claim amount or what was paid. One of the reasons that disconnect exists is because of this very complicated sort of flow in transaction. Now, this can be simplified, and I am hopeful that there's a future where this is simplified and we're working towards it. But this is sort of the most standard way today that sort of a life of a claim works. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, why does this matter? I won't read the slide, but again, to reiterate, there's different decision points happening at each stage, which again is one of the reasons why we have sort of the time delays that we do and the administrative layers and burden at each step of the way. You won't see each of these steps in the claims reports or the aggregated data reports, the utilization reports, the quarterly summaries that you are getting, regardless of how detailed they are. You are not going to be getting this level of granularity of data. Again, because each step here creates a different data field, right? So when it goes to the clearinghouse, that's a date, right? That's a date that transaction happened. When the provider actually cashes the check, that's a different date. That's a different entry point. When there's an adjustment made and the claim is rejected and has to go back, right, to the provider and then has to be resubmitted, those are all different entry points and data fields that you need to have in order to truly understand both your spend and your risk. So again, I think I've summarized a lot of those points. We don't need to belabor them. But again, once the data is aggregated down to, date of service, plan paid amount, or, allowed amount, plan paid amount, you lose all of that detail. And that detail is where a lot of the games are played and where you are losing sight into a lot of the vendors you need to keep your eye on, right? Is spread pricing happening? Are you paying an exorbitant amount of administrative fees that are part of your claims file that you weren't aware of? All of those things are lost once that data is aggregated at the end of that cycle. Next slide, please. All right, so I've described a very sort of complex transaction set, and there are hundreds of data fields that you should be trying to get and you want, because that gives you the complete and total picture. Now, that being said, there are a few fields that are must have. And without these fields, what I'll say is you can do a lot more if you have everything, but without these fields, you can't really do much at all. And certainly there are some opportunities for, not only identification of savings, but true oversight. If you have, if you can't get the whole spectrum, these are the fields you should really be focusing on. So Financial amounts, that's pretty obvious. Billed amount, allowed amount, paid amount. You need to know these things. You will get pushback, right? Because they think you're going to be able to back into discounts and proprietary information. But at the end of the day, as explained in the field guide, all of this information is not only should be available to you pursuant to ERISA, but a lot of it is mandated to be public and in the public domain as a result of some of the price transparency laws. So for them to argue that this is confidential or proprietary is often disingenuous because it is already in the public domain, or at least legally obligated to be in the public domain. Provider and service context, who delivered what service, where it occurred, in what setting. This is going to be increasingly, it's already very important, but even more important now with all of the site of service and place of service differentiators. Pricing and contract logic. What is the network status? What is a pricing methodology and adjustment codes? You have to know what contractual rules were applied, and obviously the pricing logic, in network, out of network, that's obviously key. And it's going to be one of the ways that you're going to be able to see, again, are you paying exorbitant recovery services fees? Where is that line item? How was this priced? Oftentimes you are paying for a out of network recovery services fee to access, let's say, MultiPlan. If you've ever heard of MultiPlan, sort of a rental wrap network around a lot of the bigger BUCA networks. Oftentimes you're paying to access, in addition to an administrative fee, you're paying to access these contracts, which are exorbitant in price because they're 20 years old and they are based on a percent of billed charges, right? Like, let's say 90% of billed charges with no cap on the bill. Oftentimes this is what you're paying. And if you don't have those fields to know what that logic was, you're just sort of flying blind. Edits and denials. And then finally, the payment and reconciliation information. This is definitely never going to come to you in sort of an aggregated report. You need to know dates. Again, I'm going to give another plug for Stacy Richter here. She did a wonderful episode. I believe it was with Preston Alexander that talked about float. So the date and timing of a lot of these payments is huge. It's massive because if you are paying a tremendous amount of money to your carrier and that money is sitting with them for an extended period of time before actually making it to the provider, they're earning interest on that. And while it might not seem like a huge number for just one employer, like if you add up the 100 million lives they might cover, it's a massive amount of money. And they're making a ton of money off it. And it's to the detriment, often, to the detriment of the providers and your community, because they're not getting paid, right? And it's money that either should be in your bank account or should be in the provider's bank account, but it's sort of getting lost in translation in that very long process that we talked about. So dates are really important. And then finally, one of the most important terms that I would love for you to remember is the reassociation trace number. It's such a, I get really excited when I hear people talk about it because that means they know what it is. This is a really, really important figure that is going to attach your claim to your financial transaction. So back when HIPAA was passed, one of the primary purposes of HIPAA was to actually standardize transactions and bring everything into a simplified manner so that systems could talk to each other, right? Up until then, most claims were being processed on paper and by fax. And so the Administrative Simplification Act, which is HIPAA, right? Part of that was trying to make it easier for claims to be matched with their financial transactions. In the past, right, let's say New York Presbyterian, they might be owed on any given day $10 million from Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield on behalf of all of the Anthem members that might have purveyed New York Presbyterian on that particular day. How do you take that big check for $10 million and allocate it out to the different members and the different plans that they are a part of, right? That's where your reassociation trace number comes in. The financial transaction can be matched with the actual claim, thereby solving that problem that used to exist. Now, what it does for us as employers is it allows us to trace from a financial perspective the claim and see, okay, that claim says it adjudicated at $10,000, right? That's what your adjudication engine says. That's what my plan book, allows for, requires, or, you've applied all your plan documents and your rules, $10,000 adjudicated claim. Now, that's great. I have the claim file, part of it, to know that that's the case. The missing piece is being able to say that claim, claim number 855 or whatever, that claim matches up and reconciles to my banking account that $10,000 actually came out of my account, right? Because what we've seen, or what I've seen in the data, is that you can see that claim in the claim file, or part of the claim file is $10,000. It looks like it adjudicated appropriately, all looks fine. But if that financial transaction underneath it says $20,000, or some markup or additional funds that have been taken out of my account, that's a mismatch, right? In the accounting world, like, that would throw off the red flag, that would throw off the spreadsheet. But we don't really do that level of accounting in healthcare, at least not most employers. So what that reassociation trace number does, again, is it allows you to match the claim to the actual financial transaction that is occurring either in your bank account or the trust account that your carrier has set up for you. Next slide. All right. So I wanted to make this a little real because to me, I am not a data person, and I'm not a tech person. I'm a word person. I like writing things and, writing briefs and speeches. I'm not sort of technologically savvy or very data focused. However, for me, it feels more real to actually see what this data might look like in practice. And so for those of you who might suffer from my sort of deficiencies when it comes to technology and data, I thought it would be helpful to show you what, so you could actually visualize what this might look like. And this is an example of the formats for both the 835 and the 837 document. Again, these are simplified, but it gives you a flavor and an idea of what these files actually look like, right? And you can see, for example, if you look to your left, I knew one of them had a reassociation trace number on it, but you have your payer, your payee, you have addresses, place of service. There's a lot of information in this data and in these formats. And I couldn't look here and match them up for you, but any computer system absolutely could. And even I'm sure you don't have to be a data scientist to be able to bump these up against each other and see where there are mismatches, or see how they talk to each other. And certainly, again, when you have that reassociation trace number, you can see where the claim landed, right? Like, what was the final amount of the adjudicated claim, and what was the amount that came out of your account. You can verify pricing accuracy, trace your payments. You can understand why amounts changed. Why was something adjusted? Why was something resubmitted? There's a code for all of this. Again, it's, hundreds of thousands or millions of potential, sort of combinations and fields. But again, it is all standardized, right? This is data that, every ICD-9 code has, there's only a set number of them. There are a lot of them, but it is standardized so that there is a way that you can actually decipher and use this data without a ton of sort of restructuring and needing to go in and fix the data, because it should be standardized pursuant to HIPAA. With this data, you can detect third-party payments. So within your claims, are you paying a repricer? you might think that you're simply paying your admin, your administrative third-party administrator a set PM to administer your claims, and everything else is going to your providers, right? In terms of medical claims costs. But what you don't see typically is that you might be paying rental network fees, payment integrity fees that are tacked onto claims. And they won't appear again in summary reports. And then finally, just having access to this data and being able to run some like very, I won't say elementary, but sort of basic audit functions, like does the claim, adjudicated match the claim payment that was made? Something as simple as that is a wonderful way to demonstrate that you are exercising fiduciary control over your health plan. Next slide, please. All right. So here I thought often, again, trying to bring it down to like the less theoretical, less informational, and more like, how the heck am I supposed to take this information and use it in my everyday job, right? So I thought this would be a good way to try and do that through these various scenarios. Like, so if you were to ask, we would like, X fields from our data in order to determine or exercise our fiduciary duty over our claims expenditures, right? Usually what you're going to hear when you ask for your data, if you haven't heard this already, is, well, tell me what you're looking for. And I bet we can find it, right? It sounds great, right? That we're trying to be helpful. And maybe that individual really is trying to be helpful. But what the real trick there is, we want to figure out exactly what you're looking for so that we can curate a report and or data fields in order to sort of assuage your concerns without giving you the whole enchilada, right? Because the whole enchilada is really valuable, and that's where the gold is. So yeah, I would love if this was like a live audience. I would ask who on the audience has actually heard that phrase before, because I bet there would be a lot of hands that would go up. Because I tell you, like, I probably heard it 50 times in my 3-year tenure with the state. So you'll hear that first. And so what you might say, right, is we want to know what we're looking for is whether there are any non-medical or third-party fees that are being paid through the medical claims wire. Are there capitation payments? Are there network rental fees? Are there repricing or payment integrity fees? We want to see that in our data, right? And what you will probably get is, in response, is some sort of attempt to, again, assuage your concerns about these fees being tacked onto medical claims. And you will probably see, and I'm saying this from experience, you'll probably get something back that, shows some of the things on the right-hand side, right? You'll hear statements such as, all claims are paid in accordance with contracted rates in standard administrative processes. Like, ding, ding, ding. That's their way of saying we pay things in a way that's in accordance with the agreements we get to see, but not you, right? Which is, understand that all claims are paid in accordance with contracted rates and standard administrative procedures. Could I please see those, right? The answer is going to be no. And, a good response might be, that's why I need my data, right? Like, that's why I need to see in more granular detail some of this information. Next slide, please. So what your carrier is probably going to, they're going to tell you that, this figure, this number, this all makes up your medical expense. These are medical claims. But again, what that aggregate number is not going to show is things like capitation fees, network access fees, repricing services fees, and or other TPA adjustments. And so there are things that are going to be hidden in that final number if you don't see everything that's tacked along the way. And I've proposed a response here that I would suggest that any of you use if you do get that pushback, or that, we're happy to produce a report. If you can just tell us what you're looking for. The summary helps, but it doesn't answer my question. To understand that, we really do need access to the underlying claims and remittance data, not just these reports. Next slide. I think I have another example here. So this is a pretty common one, especially this past year when we had substantial rate hikes really across the country. We've experienced a meaningful year-over-year increase in medical spend. We'd like to get our claims data so that we can understand what's changed. And the typical response you would get back is, we can provide you with detailed data and reporting absolutely to address those concerns. You'll also probably get a caveat that, don't be worried, because we're seeing these trends across the market and it's not unique to your plan. The costs are being driven by broader healthcare dynamics, utilization, not administrative or pricing decisions, specific to the TPA. That's generally the line you're going to get. And the report that you are most likely to receive in response is going to be a cost drivers and utilization report, a high cost claimant report, top 10 drug spend report. And it will show you, right, increased utilization at outpatient services. What are the price hikes, highest average cost per episode? What are the diagnosis categories? You're going to get an MSK chart. You're going to get a cardio, what's the word I'm looking for? No. Can you control whether you're overpaying or paying twice or twice as much for drugs, or for a certain procedure, or a certain provider? Yes, you can control that. That is in your control. And that's why you need that deeper level. Next slide. Yeah, so this is like a very basic example of, these are the types of reports that you'll get back. But what that doesn't show you is how services are redirected through a system, and through a claim system, whether there are embedded fees, if dollars moved within the TPA payments, different network rates were applied, or what the internal logic repriced allowed amounts to. And I'll draw attention to that one, because it's not like perhaps this could happen, or, we're not seeing the data, so we don't know that it's not happening. I know from experience, and again, if you read anything about the whistleblower case that I was a part of, we had, and the data that I discovered, we were paying substantially more than the billed amount that was coming in. So the example I think that caught most headlines was, we had a bill come in that was $675,000 approximately, and the plan paid $2.1 million. So we were paying substantially more than what I'll call the sticker price. And when I saw that in the data that I was looking at for a completely different purpose, but I saw this, what I thought was an anomaly, what I thought was a mistake, and then realized it wasn't a mistake. In 50 claims alone, we paid $12 million over the sticker price. So in many cases, we were paying straight up billed amount. So the hospital was sending out the bill, we were paying it dollar for dollar. But in many cases, we were paying substantially more than they were even asking for, right? And you'd never know that or see that if you weren't actually looking at the dollars. And so it does happen. And there's another example of this type of sort of pricing game that was exposed in a recent lawsuit, not so recent, but recent from an appellate perspective, the Tierra Yachts decision out of Michigan. Now, you don't have to know sort of the background of the case. The important thing for that is to know that the carrier had actually implemented something called flip logic, meaning that when it was processing out-of-state claims, it actually flipped the network status such that the billed amount was always paying 100%. So hospital sent out a bill that was 20 times more than it should have been, it was getting paid. There was no logic in place to stop it. And it was an intentional flip. And that kind of flip logic, right, that would have been easily discovered and disclosed had somebody been looking at the data or had access to the data, because it's certainly something that would have sort of jumped out if you were reviewing it with any sort of not even a fine tooth comb, but even at a sort of like more macro level. So again, I think the response here, if you ever get those reports back and you want to push back for more, is benchmarking explains a common trend, sure, but it doesn't explain how my claims were priced or paid. And again, there's only so much you have control over in your health plan. You don't have control over, folks, what their weight or their cardiometabolic conditions, or some of the things that drive healthcare costs. What you do have control over is your checkbook. Exercise that control, and the only way to exercise that control, again, is with the data. Next slide. Okay, so this is the point at which I want to say, like, whew, take a breath, and I will do the same. This is not something that is for the faint-hearted, right? And it's not something that everybody is going to sort of be on the same path or even on the same place in their journey, right? You sort of start from, we get reports, like we get quarterly utilization reports, we get very aggregate summary level data, and that's fine. That's what you've been told you need. That's what the industry has said you should be good with. But it's no longer sufficient. And now that you're hearing that and you know that, what can I do next? And what can I do better? You're not going to go from limited visibility to full visibility and autonomy overnight. You're not even going to go from limited visibility to full autonomy in a year, right? This takes time. It's a journey. And wherever you are on that journey, I think it's important just to sort of take a step back and understand that, like, this is hard stuff. And if you're only on step 1 or 2, it's fine. It's good. Go to step 3 or 4. Like, you don't have to be completely daunted and overwhelmed by the thought of getting to step 6, 7, or 8, right? Where you might need more data scientists, or you might need another data vendor or your first data vendor. Put one foot in front of the other, and understand that it is a journey. And there are certain, like I said earlier, there are certain like must-have fields. Fight for what's important with, your end goal. And if that means you're mapping out what the next 3 years of your data journey looks like, that's great, right? I think that that's actually a really good strategy, is to understand that, like, I'm not going to send out a demand letter on day 1 and get all my data back on day 2, right? This is a process, and understand that. And I think that'll help you sort of address it in reasonable chunks, build your case, and understand what carriers and PBMs and vendors you can work with that are going to help you each step of the way, and use that as sort of a metric when evaluating your partners. Are they going to be a part of this journey and this path? Because this is the one you want to be on, for sure. Yeah, the goal isn't to jump to the end. The goal is to move deliberately in the right direction. Next slide. Okay, so I think, yeah, the timing is actually pretty good on that. I have time for questions, because I hope that there are questions. And as I said, start practicing now and ask something uncomfortable, because that's what's going to get you from the first step, up along your journey.
And let me provide a couple comments on this, and we'll monitor for questions here. But as you can see, Chris is truly one of the great resources available to help understand this. And as she mentioned, it's not for the faint of heart. let me just say a word about the guide. A lot of what Chris talked about is in the guide. And any employer who is a member of Texas Employers for Affordable Healthcare, they can download this guide at no cost. And it's encouraged that if an employer was to do that, that they would share with their consultant and some of their data analytics people to help understand this. Most of the employers in our coalitions, even the large jumbo employers, typically do not have the internal expertise to be able to do some of the things that Chris described. She's unique in that. So one question I would ask Chris is how do folks go about finding out who they can partner with to help them with this? They may even have a data warehouse. They're getting reports from their health plans. It's not this. What does that journey look like? What does that RFP look like? Maybe you could address that.
Sure. I think the first step has to be becoming conversant yourself. And I don't mean becoming an expert, but knowing enough to know when somebody knows as much or more than you, right? And so that's where the field guide, like the glossary and there's a section on like how to talk like a data expert, right? What acronyms do I need to know? What what language can I use to indicate to the person sitting across the table from me that I actually know what I'm talking about, right? And HIPAA is like a great example. When people try to like weaponize HIPAA as a reason not to get data and that they can't share data, you know that you're not working with the right partner, because if they knew truly what you were asking and they would understand that HIPAA is really a blessing and your tool to be able to access data. So the first step is sort of schooling yourself up. And then the second, I think, is challenging your existing partners to see if they will step up to the plate, because often they aren't pushed to do this, right? If they're not pushed, they're not going to. That's not in sort of the typical consultant's DNA. They're going to do enough work to sort of keep you happy, keep you as a client. But if you're not pushing them to do this, they're not just going to do it by themselves, right? So you might have a partner that is willing to do this that just hasn't been pushed. And if they are unwilling, even when pushed, that's when you have to start to look to external expertise. And there are folks out there that are conversant in this and can help you. I can't say that there is sort of a one-stop shop or a list that's sort of out there in the ethosphere that I would be able to point to. But I think that going to folks like, Chris and Marianne and the group here who are working with people like me and my colleagues that know this stuff, they can absolutely help point you in the right direction. So yeah, I think, you have to be able to, again, ask those smart and uncomfortable questions and ask for help from the right resources.
There's, I don't know how many on the Zoom are familiar with Health Rosetta, but they provide some guidance. I think Chris probably contributed to that. There's RFP and contract language templates in there to ensure that you're getting what you need when you need it. There's you can actually look and see these are the most common reports that folks should ask for and how to use it. That's in there. It's also in the guide. So this is just a beginning, an orientation for those who may be interested in. The second one on February 26th, what's that topic again?
It's a pharmacy claims and PBM transparency, part 2 of the field guide. So it should be
Correct.
really, really interesting and helpful.
So that's on the 26th. And then the third one is on March, and I can't remember the date, but we'll be announcing that. And that one is, what are we going to be addressing in that one, Chris, again?
Okay, that's on Thursday, March 26th. It's called Part 3 of the field guide, Integrating Data for Strategy and Oversight, Part 3.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
Right.
Yeah,
great
this was,
field.
this was, this,
That's the fun one where we get to say, okay, now that we're conversant, now that we have, even if we don't have all of it, if we have these key fields, what can we unleash with this knowledge? And they're really, again, like, I think I have some great examples and I can pull from some colleagues, but there's a lot of really amazing things you can do both from a financial perspective and from sort of an employee, certainly a financial well-being, but also just a better health plan experience that you can do once you have access to this information.
right. So employers on board, they can do a little homework, but by then look at the guide and go from there. So I don't see any questions there. Mary Ann, do you have
Well, yeah, there is one from Anonymous, actually thanking you, Chris,
oh,
for
very good. I
both
just see it
Chris's.
there.
So
Yeah.
what would you recommend for continuous learning, let's say between now and when we have Part 2, which will be on pharmacy and PBM transparency, or in addition to what you've suggested today?
Yeah, I mean, I can always sort of talk about what my journey was, and maybe that'll be helpful. I distinctly remember reading through, again, the Administrative Simplification Act. I looked it up. What is this? Like, what, and you go down this rabbit hole and you're like, oh, what's a standardized transaction? And then you start reading as to like why these things exist, and putting those pieces together sort of really helps you understand on a sort of much broader level, like why these files exist. It is somewhat intuitive, right? And once it becomes intuitive to you, you don't know everything, but you know how to ask the next right question. So I would say go to original source materials and just like learn up. I would even say I've known people that just sort of went to ChatGPT University and said, like, what's an 835 file? What's an 837? Tell me more about that, right? And they found it tremendously helpful. Obviously, always double check your information. But another thing, I know I've given Stacy Richter a couple of great plugs here, but there is the professionals that she has on her show are truly expert in this space. I cannot recommend enough the Clearinghouse episode that just happened. Really, really good. And some of the other ones that I mentioned. You can start there, and those professionals are always making themselves available. Have a call with a Clearinghouse vendor. They're happy to pick up the phone and have a call with you and explain how things work. They're always looking to expand their networks, and I know they love to talk to an employer. So, ask interesting questions to interesting people.
We'll put something in the follow-up here, another resource to plug Chris again. She prepared a guide. It's called the Health Plan Turnaround. And a lot of what she describes is in that. And you can get that on Amazon. It's really cheap, quite frankly, and extremely valuable. Extremely well written, and it kind of walks through the guidance on step by step on how to make a lot of this happen. So I know we're at
Thanks for that plug,
time.
Chris.
Sure, we'll put that in the follow-up.
That's great. So I want to thank you, Chris, and Chris Deacon as well for an outstanding presentation. Love your slides. And Chris Giesecke for working with Chris to bring this to the Texas Business Group on Health in partnership with the Texas for Employers for Affordable Healthcare. This is supposed to, I think you'll all find who attended this, that this will equip you with the knowledge that you'll need to understand your benefits more carefully, and also ask the right questions and challenge some of the assumptions that you're dealing with from all of your different partners having to do with the claims management. So thank you so much for being part of this. We look forward to seeing you again, or hearing you, Chris, on the Thursday, February 26th for Part 2, as I said, on PBM transparency and pharmacy claims management. So thank you. We have a wonderful next month before we see you again. Thank you all for participating.
Here, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.